Well, I've got kind of a tough subject today. I got to admit, this one's been stressing me out quite a bit because it's all about ICE in schools and raids in schools, or even the fear of raids in school causing children not to go to school, or not believing that schools are like a safe spot where they can go and actively learn, right? I almost equate it to like if I was going to school and I knew I was going to be bullied, I don't want to go to school, right? If I was going to school and I knew there was going to be gangs there, or a teacher's going to yell at me, or I don't have my homework, I don't want to go. Like, schools have got to be a place that are safe, inviting, and that children can actively learn so they can be productive members of society. I think we've got to continue to remember overall what the purpose of schools are. And like, I don't want to get into whether or not you think that undocumented workers or illegal aliens, whatever you want to call them, should or should not be in the country. Like, that's called a straw man argument. It's a distraction from what the real issue is. Right. So over the last, since Trump came into office, one of his big policy issues was we're going to deport people. And there was actually a great episode on the Wall Street Journal where they were not arresting and deporting as many people as the administration said they were going to. And who started attacking the administration? Well, it was the press. You're not really getting rid of all these undocumented workers like you said you were going to, which then drove the administration to actually ramp up their immigration enforcement issues. And I don't know if you've been watching the news at all, but they'll wait outside of courts and arrest people that went in for a traffic violation or whatever, and they'll arrest them. And so now the people that could potentially be deported just don't show up to the court cases, right? Well, that is happening in schools because if an ICE agent goes into a room, into a space, into a coffee shop, and they arrest everyone with no documentation of citizenship, I'm getting deported. I don't walk around with documentation. Now, I am blessed, I guess, in this case, to be white. So the likelihood of me necessarily being deported is less likely. It's probably pretty unlikely. But think if you're a legal citizen, you were born here, you work here, you pay your taxes, but you happen to look like somebody of the Hispanic culture, and you could potentially get thrown into an ICE truck and deported to someplace you've never been. I mean, that would cause me not to want to go out, right? And so, I mean, these are the unintended consequences of good people, regular people, law-abiding people, people that pay their taxes, not showing up to school. And so what are the districts facing? Well, schools are facing the fact that not just the undocumented families, but the children that may be documented, maybe their parents aren't, or maybe they're all just undocumented. Whatever the case is, here's the effects. They're not going to school. Okay, so the long-term damage of a student missing a school, it's real and it lasts forever. I mean, look, we're still looking at the negative repercussions of COVID, right? COVID, kids weren't in school and their numbers go down. I mean, if you don't go to school, your number you learn less. You forget stuff. I mean, it's kind of common sense, but like, let's don't forget that. And so that means these people are going to be at increased risk of poverty, mental health challenges. They're not going to their lower lifetime earnings. More days you miss of school, the lower your lifetime earnings are. The lower your ability is to be a contributing member of society. And I thought that's what we wanted with education. I thought that what we wanted, the purpose of free public education, was making sure we have a lot of people that actually, Caroline, this is for you, actually add to society instead of take it away. Okay, so the claim out there is that, well, undocumented workers don't add to society. So they're a drain on society, so we get rid of them. Okay, well, now what we're doing is we're going to cause an entire new group of people that could have become productive members of society not to be, because we don't want to create a safe space, at least in schools. I mean, you can have whatever opinion you want to about documented or undocumented. You want to protect them, you want to leave you want to open the gates, allow everyone to come in, or you want to get rid of every one of them. That is a completely irrelevant argument to this, because this is called an argument of what is true in reality. And this is what we got to start teaching legislators, all right, and community members, is that the reality of it is they are here. The reality of it is a lot of them will not be removed. A lot of them are legally here, and aren't showing up to school because of these ICE raids that are no longer a distant threat. They're actually happening on school grounds, even at graduations, in classrooms right now, and families are fleeing and students are walking out. So there's the problem statement. Now, we got to get to what we can actually do about it. Now, school districts are saying one thing, but let's talk about what they can actually do too. All right? So, districts are saying that they can create schools or safe zones, and they're putting that out to their community. And they're saying that districts that rely on sensitive location policy bans would stop ICE from going into schools. Okay. And some districts, I think this was one out of Louisiana, said we're going to have secure events. Secure events. Now, that's the premise. This is not secure events from criminals. This is secure events from the police. So I want you just to think about that from a legal perspective. So they're saying we're going to have secured events, and we're going to control entry zones for graduations, including virtual participation options, right? That way the kids still get to go to graduation. Well, can they legally stop police officers from going into a secure event, a safe location? I just want you to, I'm giggling because it's like, it's not how the law works, man. All right. So anyway, so they're also talking about the fact that schools are offering legal education and rights education to families. Districts in New York City and the teachers union are doing this kind of like know your rights, and they're sending out material that are designed to let people know that they have rights. I like that. I don't think it necessarily overcomes the fear component, right? Because if you're deported, it's funny. I had a professor in law school named Professor Swartz, and he was an administrator. I did constitutional law and administrative law, and he wrote like every book that like almost every university uses, like for constitutional law. So this is the guy, and we were having a debate about administrative laws and like laws done by Congress. And I'm not going to try to bore you with the difference, but the basic difference is an administrative law is like a policy violation, right? Like, so some department comes up with this policy, but Congress didn't approve it. So is it really a law or not law? And the way that the Professor Swartz framed it, he goes, well, what's the difference between an administrative jail and a regular jail? And the bars are the same, the doors are the same, your freedom's gone. So even if it's an administrative law or an actual like law by Congress, the results are the same. You're still in jail, and you can call it whatever you want to. So I thought that framed like such a reasonable construct for me, which is you can teach people their rights, but if they're detained and they get deported, they can know their rights all they want. But if they don't have money and means and lawyers to enforce their rights, knowing your rights and enforcing your rights, two big things. But I think you should keep doing it. You want to keep educating people on their rights for sure, right? I don't think that gets rid of the fear. And then some schools are invoking the FERPA. I'm going to get into that in a minute. And this lawsuit called Plyler versus Doe, where they're saying they will refuse to share information with immigration authorities. They're not going to share information. Okay. So that's what they're saying they're going to do. A lot of districts are attempting to be proactive. And I think Caroline, should we get into what's actually happening?
Absolutely.
Okay. Caroline, she goes, Brian, you got it. They already know what the problems are. Well, not everybody knows the problems. Sometimes you cannot assume that everybody gets what other school district and that everybody's facing this problem, right? And so, I want to do one other thing before we get into what's actually happening. Okay. We here at CASA, we do annual polls. We do a lot of different polling data. And we polled on this issue. And so I'm just going to talk about a couple of the questions because I hit this poll in another podcast. But we talked about, we polled and we said, look, these were legal citizens, documented citizens. That's who took the poll. And we said, what's your attitude towards federal policies regarding children of undocumented families? Like, should they go to school or should they be not allowed to go to school? Okay. And like, so we wanted to ask people in general, should illegal aliens and undocumented children be allowed to go to school or should they just be barred? Like, seems like a question because a lot of people will say that, well, they should be deported. But I wanted to know what families really think. And now this is a good statistical poll. We got another podcast. We'll link it to here, hopefully. Some fancy person will link it to that. I'm looking at Caroline. I don't know how to link anything. But unanimously, more than 70% of all people polled. Okay, and these are all American citizens. Okay, so the poll wasn't shaped or any way. It's American citizens that are here legally, some with kids, some without kids. Okay, and over 70% said every child deserves an education. Dear policymakers, dear school officials that are trying to educate the policymakers, there's your data point. 70% believe that every child deserves an education. And then you get about 20%, it was 21%, said immigration status should determine school access. So it didn't say that they necessarily should be deported because we didn't ask that question. But no, if you're illegal, you shouldn't get access to the schools. Now, there's another thing you need to know in polls. When you get close to 80%, that is almost tantamount to everybody. Okay, I know it sounds weird. Well, 80% is not 100%, Brian. Yeah, but in every poll I've ever run over a gazillion years, 8 to 12% of the population hate everything. I mean, they're just cantankerous. They just don't like anything. So if you get to 88, 90% on something, that is like universally accepted because, 10% of the population is going to say they don't like their water wet. The sky is not up. They're just going to argue with everything. You've met these people. You know it exists. So the fact that we're in the 70s here is massive. That is a huge number. We're not like 51, 53%. So this is Republicans, this is Democrats, this is independents. A vast majority of all these political parties agree that the kids should have access to education. So, okay, let's remind the ICE and the policymakers. I think that's probably my pro tip one, is the families want the kids to go to school. So let's don't enact ways that cause them not to go to school. That's why we stop bullying, right? That's why we try to make sure there's gun safety issues, right? So they feel safe in school. And then we do this, and then they don't feel safe in school. I'm going to try to take a deep breath. I get worked up, man. It upsets me that like we're shooting ourselves in the foot with this. And I know I'm continuing to rehash that too much, Caroline. I got it. I get it. Brian, you've already said it. But nobody's hearing what the actual problem is. And the actual problem is this law is causing kids not to go to school, and you're not going to deport them, by the way. Dear Mr. President, dear Congress, dear ICE, you're not going to get them all. Whether you want to or you don't, it's not going to happen. Instead, in 2 years, they're going to be right here. They're going to still be in America. Okay, I've got my crystal ball. I'm going to pull it out. Most of them are going to be here still. And now they're going to be uneducated and not good members of society. What, are you dumb? Like this, just God bless this. I think I'm going to have a blood vessel burst. Okay. Let's write up something, like let's start sending it to newspapers and really talk about fundamentally, people are arguing about the wrong damn thing. All right. The kids are going to be here. Do you want them to, and this is the question. Do you want them to be good members of society or don't you? And you don't get to have the argument, we don't want them members of our society. We want them gone. It's not going to happen, man. I can't get rid of mosquitoes in the South. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I did not mean to try to attribute undocumented children with mosquitoes. I'm on a rampage and I'm trying to come up with examples of things, okay? That was a really bad example. Somebody's going to have a fit. Man, don't get hyper technical on me, all right? I think my argument was that you may want everyone that it's undocumented deported. And you may also want to get rid of mosquitoes, but you can have neither. That's my point. Not, for those people that want everyone kicked out of the country. All right. So okay, let's talk about what's really happening in public schools. Okay. So despite the efforts right now, and these are real cases in Connecticut, a high school senior, and I'm going to not use the last names, named Kevin, was detained by ICE during a routine check-in days before graduation. Students walked out and left empty chairs in protest, so they're getting picked up. Safe zones or not safe zones, they're still getting grabbed. Hundreds of students in Montgomery Blair High in Maryland walked out after classmates were deported, and this article wasn't clear if ICE went to the schools or not. So, but the deportations in general is causing a negative effect. Students are now look, when I was in high school, I'd probably find out every reason in the world too as an excuse not to go to class, right? But let's don't give them excuses not to go to class, all right? And an 18-year-old in Milford, Massachusetts, was on his way to volleyball practice. It indicated it was like on school property and was arrested by ICE. Right, so this wasn't exactly a raid in schools, but we do have those. In LA, ICE agents have entered schools. They have showed up at graduations, and they have grabbed students and walked away with them. So a school nurse. This is kind of another interesting tidbit, but in Long Island, New York, a school nurse was removed from duty after wearing an ice jacket on Superhero Day, showing that it's a very sensitive issue, and a lot of districts are facing it. Right. So the other thing they're doing is they're creating these safe zones. It's good. I get it. It's a nice effort. Not sharing the data, right? Like, you don't have to share the data, and I'll dig into that in a second. But safe zones, it's a good idea. Don't think you can stop an officer with a badge from going into your safe space. Like, I just, like, so if you're also you're teaching people their rights and you're showing them the laws, well, you should also tell them that, like, you can have all the safe zones in the world, but you can't stop a cop from walking into a place that's open to the public, right? Now, private home warrants and all that stuff for sure, right? All right. So let's talk about some things that I think, and I think we're probably going to do another series on this, a deeper dive, but I kind of wanted to get an overview out today. So let's talk about, I think I got like six things that school districts can be doing, to get prepared, especially for the fall. All right. Require a judicial warrant for entry. Now, schools on their property are not legally required to let ICE or police onto campus unless they actually produce a warrant signed by a judge. All right. That is because schools are not open to the public. They have public accommodations and Title II and all those things, but we can stop people from going on. Like, we asked for their ID. We wanted who's there because our job is to protect the kidlets. Right. And so you can require a warrant. And I think that you ought to talk to your lawyers about whether or not an administrative warrant that's issued by ICE is the same thing as a judicial warrant. And they're not. They're not the same thing. So when Michigan, we're talking about administrative law and regular law, but in most areas, and I don't know if this is true at all of them, I think we should probably check this out. Is it an administrative warrant issued by ICE is not sufficient as a judicial warrant. So don't get fooled by a administrative warrant. Like, make sure that you know what your rights are in your district. So, second thing they can do. You can certainly, I still like this, designate schools as safe zones by board policies, right? And so I think you should still do that. And districts can pass local resolutions. This would come from the board, or the elected board, that declares that schools are safe zones where law enforcement must follow strict procedures, and that the superintendent or their leadership should be notified, and all warrants should go through legal counsel, and that staff then need to be trained on how to handle those ICE requests, those ICE warrants, either judicial or administrative warrants. And then you can refuse to assist in enforcement without those legal parameters. Now, I'm not suggesting that you violate the law. And I'm not suggesting if they come up with a warrant, you ignore it. That's not the same thing. It's kind of similar to this. If a police officer shows up at your house and says, can I search your house? You have a right to say no. But if they come with a warrant, you don't have a right to say no. So don't argue. Step out of the way. Even Tony Soprano, and Soprano, he knew that. You got a warrant. Give him a cup of coffee and sit down and be quiet. But if they don't have a warrant, you could be like, no, thank you. No, thank you. So just know your rights. And so this is not just the parents knowing the rights. I think this is making sure that all the staff, teachers, front desk people, they know their rights too, right? And remember, my goal here is to make sure that children feel safe to come to school so they get educated. That's my only objective here. All right. So number 3. You can certainly protect student data under the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. FERPA. I don't know if the people in the know call it FERPA or not, but it's the FERPA, right? Everybody likes their acronyms, right? But under the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, schools cannot release student records or immigration status without parental consent or subpoena. Now, this was a law that got passed in 1974. Not yesterday, not a year ago, not 2 years ago, 1974. So this law was designed to protect the privacy of student education records. Great law. We have HIPAA to protect your healthcare records. We have HERPA to protect your student education record. So doesn't that just make sense? We like to protect privacy when it comes to children. And luckily in America, we've actually been pretty good about protecting children's information and their records. And we need to keep doing that. So you do have this law, and it said, look, we cannot share this with you without a subpoena or without parental consent. So either go get the consent or show me an actual subpoena and know the difference in this in the subpoena. I don't know if ICE issues, I know that they can issue administrative warrants, but I don't think they can issue administrative subpoenas. Anyway, make sure your lawyers know, make sure your staff are trained up on how to apply FERPA, right? Somebody's going to correct me. We don't say FERPA. We call it FRUPRIA or something. Yeah, just let me know how I'm not saying it right. So this is, remember, ICE or other law enforcement must present a court-issued subpoena or a judicial warrant to get their records. So administrative request, verbal inquiries are not sufficient. And this is a real slippery slope. You better train your people that if an ICE agent shows a badge and says, I need to see the records on these 3 kids, you show it to them, you violated the law. You violated the law. They didn't violate the law by asking. Okay, they're allowed to ask. Police officers, God, man, I'm a big proponent of the police, man. I really am. And I want people to keep our rights safe and all this stuff. But I also know that if they ask to search my trunk, I'll be like, nah, no thanks, I'm in a hurry. I don't want you to search my trunk. And they have a right to ask, and you have a right to say no. We don't have to be upset by it. I would like to see the student records. You need to go get a warrant. But I love you, and you're a great person, and have a great life. But until you get me that warrant, I legally can't do it. It's not an optional request. So make sure your people know it's not an option of whether or not they can or cannot do it. By law, they cannot give those documents up. So, and I think that is a good thing to educate the parents that you're doing. By law, we're not allowed to. It's not up to us. It's a 1974 law. We cannot give out this information. All right. Now, I also want you to go look at your individual states. So states like California, Connecticut, New York, maybe a few others have passed laws that reinforce these predictions. And you may have heard me talk about the fact that there are federal laws and there are state laws, right? So sometimes you get very matching state laws and federal laws. So you have state issues and federal issues. But some of those state laws actually will increase the protection. So know your individual state protections. And this may require law enforcement to provide notice, not just a warrant, but actual notice before they show up to the property. So you have some state laws that add extra layers to this. And some states are actually funding legal services for immigrant families. So when you're out putting out, hey, know your rights, right? Also know if there are legal funds to enforce those rights. Because remember, you have all the rights in the universe. It doesn't do you any good if you're kicked out of the damn country. You got no means to enforce those rights. That's a problem, right? Okay. So we talked a lot about this. My 5th point, which is, know your rights, but you got to make sure your staff knows the rights. No, not the rights, but the law. You got to actually know what the law is. So get that out. I think I've covered that pretty good. And then offer virtual access to things. Oh, I don't really know if I necessarily like that. There's so much studies that virtual access does not build a community, does not build strong people for long term. It actually creates a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress. But you might have to do it for some things like graduation, so that people can show up and get their diploma, right? So, okay. So I hope that this, as an initial kicker into what school districts can do, can help. I'm dead certain that I'm going to get into more real world examples, but I also want to know what school districts are doing that is working. So if you know some things, let me know. All righty. Thanks.